the topic for tonight is going to be less lamdish and more praktish. And in order to sort of give you a background, so you'll know where I'm coming from, I'm going to give you a little bit of my background, because it's important to understand when I speak about Daas Torah, like who is this guy and what was his connection to Daas Torah that exists. So here's a little bit of my background. I grew up in Cleveland, Ohio, and I went to Telz Yeshiva. I was close with Rabbi Gifter, and my son sitting right over here is named after Rabbi Gifter. His name is Mordechai. And after that, I went to Staten Island Yeshiva, where I spent Shabbos by Rav Moshe before he was nifter, one of the last Shabbosim. Over a certain tkufa, I had the opportunity to get to know many of the Gedolim, and I've encouraged my own children to make it a quest to get to know Gedolim. That's a quest. So I've had 3 children learn by Reb Asher Arieli, and Reb Asher was in the mirror. You have 1,000 Bachrim. So my first Bacher, when I sent him to Reb Asher, I said, I want you to get to know Reb Asher. He said, no one can know Reb Asher. There's too many people. I said, does anyone know him? He says, a few people know him. So I said, you be amongst those few. Push your way in. And sure enough, he did, and he got close to Reb Asher. And then the next son, and Baruch Hashem, my son, who's in the mirror right now, is again close to Reb Asher Arieli. So I have tried to give that to my children, that cheshek, to connect to the Gedolim, to the Daas Torah. The big questions in my life, some of the larger questions. I was zeicher to sit by Rabbi Shach a number of times. He gave me a lot of time, and I was able to ask him. I even married my wife, Alpi Rabbi Shach. And he was the one who gave his haskama to my shidduch. And many of us have had opportunities. You know, I spent Shabbos by Rav Pam, I was his guest. And every opportunity that I had, I tried to chaperine. And as a matter of fact, I sat and learned b'chavrusa with Rabbi Chaim Kanievsky many years ago. And my regret is when I was a bacher, I never met the Stipler. And I feel bad about that. But I did meet Rabbi Chaim. I used to go into Rabbi Chaim to ask him questions, and once he was just sat down to learn with this chavrusa, he said, why don't you join us? So I sat and learned the chavrusa. I didn't know what was flying, but it was still cool. Daas Torah. Daas Torah. The truth is, the parsha this week and next week, that great struggle was the struggle of Daas Torah, where a Moshe Rabbeinu says, go into Eretz Yisrael, and they say, maybe not. And many of them were Nasim. I mean, they were Nasim, and they were very chashuv of people. There were people who had given matanas. They were very big people in Klal Yisrael, and it must have been a little bit confusing to figure out who is the Daas Torah. I mean, we know Moshe is Moshe Rabbeinu, but there's Zimri ben Salu. There's every one of the Nasim that exist. What about Hashem ben Nun? What about Kalev ben Yefuna? Who is Shafat ben Chayri? Who's Shafat ben Chayri? Who are these people? They were the Gedolim, and some of them had Daas Torah, and some of them did not. Now, you and I think that should have been a no-brainer when you've got Moshe Rabbeinu. So then you have Gedolim, then you have the Gadol Hadar, and you have the Gadol of all Doros, who, Pal Dabra boy, right? There should have been no question. But Lamaisa, that was the question. Who do we listen to? And next week's Parsha as well, in Parshas Korach, the exact same struggle Klal Yisrael had when Korach gets up and he says, why are you being shire over Klal Yisrael? There's plenty of Daas Torah to go around. You're not the only Daas Torah. The buck does not stop with you. So that was a struggle that we had to identify who that Daas Torah was. And one can even argue that even Miriam and Aaron they struggled a little bit to understand that Moshe Rabbeinu was the Daas Torah. So Hashem says, why weren't you scared? He is the Daas Torah of the door. It's hard to identify Daas Torah, and today there is this tidal wave. It's part of this very modern dor ike shefasalto. This is a strange kind of a generation that we're living in, where you could use the word yeshivish and it's derogatory, chalila. Right? We're living in a dor where when you say Daas Torah says this, people mock and they scoff. And it's up to us to be machzer al Torah l'yoshna. What is Daas Torah? Does it exist? Who has Daas Torah today? Who do we turn to? How do we know? How do we identify? And then connected to that is also, who should I make as my Rebbe? Can I assume my Rebbe has Daas Torah? Now, I'm not going into the Hasidic world so much, although I have my own Hasidic pedigree. I'm a grandson of the Belzer Rebbe. But my father was a Litvak, so I will speak just in pure Litvish terms. How do we identify Daas Torah? People ask, after this generation's Gedolim, Achar Mei ve'Estrim passes on, who is the next generation of Daas Torah? And how can we compare them? So, let's give a working definition of Daas Torah. I'm going to give you a working definition. It's a lay definition. It's even perhaps a psychological definition of Daas Torah, but it works for me, and I hope it'll work for you as well. Many years ago, when I was a younger bacher, there was a video craze that was going around called Tetris. I don't know how many of you nod if you've heard of Tetris. Tetris, okay, you know Tetris? Tetris used a good Yiddish niggin. Remember the Yiddish niggin? Remember that? Yiddish niggin, Tetris. And Tetris is the kind of a game, it's a puzzle. Basically, it's a puzzle. And you've got different shaped blocks that are falling from the top of the screen to the bottom. And you've got to complete lines by rotating the blocks so that there's no gaps in the line. And after a whole line is filled up with blocks, that line disappears. But if you miss even one block, then that line doesn't disappear, and the screen gets smaller and smaller until you lost the game. So throughout the game, you're flipping over blocks, different shapes, so they fit into different slots. Okay, there was one day in my life where I was young, I was pretty young. I picked it up and I was hooked. And after one day, I said, "This is terrible. Baruch Hashem, we don't have video games in our house. Chazdei Hashem for that." But I was young. There was this video game, and after one day, I'm like, it was an hours. I'm rotating blocks. This block, that. You know what I'm talking about? You're rotating the blocks. Now, anyone who's ever done this game Tetris, when you put the game down, something very bizarre happens. And what happens is, you put the game down, and you look around, you walk around, and suddenly, every shape in the room, you are rotating. No, right? It's true. Right? Every shape, that door, if I just made it sideways, it would fit in between the washing station. And right in that, everything begins to rotate in your mind. Because for the past few hours, you were rotating shapes until everything fit perfectly. So when you put it down, you're still in that mode of rotating shapes. And after a few minutes, it goes away. But those first few minutes after you put it down, it's very trippy. It's like, oh my goodness, what's going on? Everything's being turned around. What really happened was your mind became calibrated to rotating shapes. When you rotate shapes enough time, then your mind begins to think in terms of rotating shapes. When you learn Torah, and you learn a lot of it very often, your mind begins to calibrate itself to Daas Hashem. That's Daas Torah. Daas Torah simply means that HaKadosh Baruch Hu has a certain way of looking at the world. He made the world a certain way, and He has a certain way of looking at it. And that way, of course, is emes. It's chasam shel HaKadosh Baruch Hu. It's authentic. It's real. There's no falshkeit in chas v'shalom. It's emestic. We live in a false world, and we're very confused. What is right? What is wrong? Ever since Adam and Chava ate from the Eitz Hadas, we're confused. But what we try to do is we try to calibrate our brains so that they line up with the way Hashem looks at the world. How do you calibrate your brain to think like God? How do you calibrate your brain so that the Eibishter's thinking is your thinking? And the answer is, the more you learn of the way Hashem thinks, the more you'll think like Hashem. Think about this. The more you learn about the way Hashem thinks, the more calibrated your mind is to think like Hashem. So a gadol, by their very nature, is somebody whose mind is calibrated to the way Hashem thinks. I had this very bizarre meeting last week. Someone came to my house and they drained me a cup for an hour about something that it was so ridiculous. And I didn't know what am I going to do with a guy like this? He's just going on and like, my time is precious. I can't sit down. And what he wanted was preposterous. He had this proposal that was not al pi Torah, but he felt it was very stark, and he'd bring down rayas. It was not. Finally, I said, you know what? You have such a big proposal. If you want the oil to adopt your proposal, you got to go to the top. Go to Shmuel Kamenetsky. I'll give you Shmuel's number. I have his cell. Call Shmuel. And I felt bad because maybe I'll tell this guy to drain Shmuel a cup. But I figured if Shmuel says nonsense and nonsense, then maybe that'll end the story. Instead, I get an email from him a few days later. Thank you so much for your suggestion to speak to Shmuel. He told me such and such and such and such. He says my idea is not viable. However, I disagree, because I think so and so. And this guy said, Amar Daraisa. And you disagree? Like, on what grounds do you see? How much Torah do you know? How much time have you spent learning? Yeah, but I saw the Rambam. He's seen every Rambam multiple times with the Noisakeh. Like, what do you... So, the very fact that a person says they have Das Torah, it would have to be that they're a person who is oisek in Torah. Now, I'm going to jump ahead a little bit, but I want to say something about this. Very often, we look for Rabbeim for ourselves who will give us hadracha. And we hope that those Rabbeim have Das Torah. So, what I'm going to say is not controversial, but it's something that it's kedai to absorb. If you want somebody to give you a hadracha that is Das Torah, then they have to be the kind of people who are still oisek in Torah. Why do I say this? There are many manhigim today who, at a certain point in their lives, were licked in learning. But because of the oil of the tzibur, they're not anymore. They're being oisek in the tzibur, they're answering questions and they're mediating and this and that, but they no longer are licked in learning, and maybe they haven't been licked in learning for 25 years. So they may have a shtela, they may have, they may be Talmidei Chachamim, but it's hard to say that a person who's not licked in learning is a Das Torah anymore. And this is not at all impugning somebody who is not able to sit and learn all the time. In Tells, Rabbi Elimeir Blach, I once heard this when I was a bacher. I couldn't believe why this is such a big deal. Rabbi Elimeir Blach said that he once made a resolution that he would never go a day without learning an hour. Now, here I am, I'm a bacher in yeshiva, like, an hour? You're the Rosh Yeshiva. You should be learning like 10 hours, 12, 14 hours. You're not going to go by one day without an hour? And then they tell this story about he was on a fundraising trip with somebody else, and it was past midnight, and they had been going since 9, 10 o'clock in the morning, and they'd been going from house to house, door to door, and it was 12 o'clock at night, and Eli Meir said, you know what? The other guy said, I'm going to sleep. He said, I didn't do my hour. And he opened up a sefer and learned for an hour. And I remember as a bacher thinking, I'm not nispoil over that story. He's a Rosh Yeshiva, he should be learning. But then I realized the facts of life, which is that the Gedolim, the Manhigim, have the oil of the Tzibur on their shoulders, and there are kufas and times, and sometimes there's a lot of time where they just don't have time to learn. And I find this, I'm now Oisik in Tzibur, I do Kiruv and all sorts of other things, and I find it a struggle. And I now today I'm the spoil over that story. It's 12 o'clock at night and you're zonked and you got to get up at 6 o'clock the next day or 7 o'clock. But if you want to go to a Daas Torah, they have to be calibrated. And the only way you're calibrated is if you're licked in learning. And that's actually something that Klal Yisrael has been very makbid on. If you look at the Gedolim who we consider Daas Torah, like a Reb Chaim Kanievsky, the highlight of these Gedolim are that they are still very much licked in learning. They're still sitting and learning day and night. They say about the Vilna Gaon that when the Vilna Gaon had a big question from the community, what should the community do? They say the Vilna Gaon wouldn't answer ala makom. Instead, he would sit and he would learn for 6 hours. Now, the Vilna Gaon, 6 hours, that's what he always learned. 6 hours, half an hour sleep, 6 hours, half an hour sleep. But what he would do was he would sit and learn for 6 hours, and then the first answer that would pop into his mind about the question of the tzibur is the answer he gave the tzibur. The first answer that came to his mind. Why? For the exact same reason that I just said. His mind was calibrated to Torah. That's what he wanted to do. He wanted to calibrate his mind. I'm going to learn for 6 hours. I'm not going to pick my head up from the sefer. I'm going to be so shakua in learning that the moment I pick up, my mind is still flipping shapes. My mind is still flipping sugyas. It's still clear exactly what the Daas Torah says. Now, there's no question that we witness, and we're witnessing Niskatnu Adoros. There's no question. And when I was young, we had the Rav Moshes and the Rav Yaakov Kamenetsky's, we had the Rav Hutner's, we had very, very big people. And we had the Stiplers, and even before that we had the Chazon Ish. We had very, very, very big people. And we look around and we say, where's today's Rav Moshe? Where's today's Chazon Ish? And we may lose confidence that maybe a Daas Torah that we could rely on in absolute terms is lacking. So Chazal speak about this. This is not my question. And Chazal give a few different answers. And I want to give you the answers that Chazal give. And it's very important to hear this, because I know especially the old-timers here who were Zoicheb, were in Muncie, Torah anytime is watching, so you have to know we're in Muncie. Muncie was Rabbi Yaakov Kamenetsky land. When you had Rabbi Yaakov Kamenetsky walking around the streets, there was nothing like that. Right? And the Rivnitzer Rebbe, you had very big people. So, one answer Chazal give us is the answer called Yiftach B'dorei K'Shmuel B'dorei. Yiftach, who was not a great tzaddik in the way that the Navi explains his story. He was somebody with a problematic background. He was a warrior. He made a mistake with a certain shavua. The Gemara says the first one that comes out becomes a makdish to Hashem. It turns out to be his daughter. Yiftach, he was big. He was for sure bigger than we realize. But Shmuel, Yiftach B'dorei K'Shmuel, how could that be? We know about Shmuel. It says Moshe v'Aaron v'Koyanav u'Shmuel b'Karei Shemai. Shmuel was as big as Moshe. So by the law of transference, are you saying that Yiftach was as big as Moshe? If Yiftach was like Shmuel and Shmuel was like Moshe, Yiftach, you can't say that. You can't. How do you even utter those words? And the answer is yes. Every generation needs a different kind of Daas Torah. And the Daas Torah that each generation needs is catered to understand that generation. There's an interesting thing. I'm sure we're very aware of it, but we go through different tekufas. And the tekufa from the Tanoim to the Amoraim to the Goinim to the Rishonim and the Achronim. How do we know when a tekufa ends? How do we know? Maybe we're at the end of the Achronim. Are we the Achrei Achronim? Someone says. Are we the Masmidim? I mean, it's a drop off, right? So, our understanding of the end of a tekufa works like this. Niskanu Adoris means that the generations, even within the same tekufa, keep falling. So, for example, if we're in the tekufa of the Achronim, well, guess who else is in this tekufa? Rabbi Kiva Eger. Is there a Rabbi Kiva Eger that we know of? No, there's no Rabbi Kiva Eger walking around. There's no Vilna Gaon walking around. There's no one like that. And yet we're in the same tekufa as Rabbi Kiva Eger. So what happens is the generations go down further and further until suddenly there's somebody who's so great, they're as great as the Gedolim at the beginning of the tekufa. So if you were looking at a graph, the graph would look like this. Right? Over the years, the level of the Gedolim and their Torah knowledge and their connection, right, were further away from Har Sinai, further away from the Messiah, from the transmission. So it's going further and further down. And then all of a sudden, you have a Gadol that's out of place. He's so much bigger than everyone else that the drop off from that Gadol tells you, wow, that's just a totally different kufa. So by the Mishnayos, by the Tanoim, it was Rabbi Yehuda Nasi. By the Gemara, by the Amoraim, it was Ravina and Rav Ashi. They were so big. You had Reb Hai Gon. By the Achronim, Rishonim Achronim, who did you have? Who is that cut off person? It was Maran, Rabbi Yosef, Rabbi Yosef Cairo. Rabbi Yosef Cairo was so big, he was so huge, that after Rabbi Yosef Cairo there was a drop off. And then we saw, okay, we're closing that tekufa. So, did that tekufa close? Maybe. Maybe it takes a few years and a little bit of distance to say, wow, that tekufa closed. Maybe Reb Chaim Kanievsky is the end of that tekufa. I don't know. He knows Kol HaTorah Kula. Is there anyone else out there who knows Kol HaTorah Kula like that? Maybe there is. Maybe Yaakov Adas. Who knows? We don't know. But the idea is that every generation gets the gadol that it needs. And our generation is a very perplexing generation. It's a difficult generation. And it could well be that you put her at Bishur Leib Diskin and you try to explain the kids on Instagram and Facebook, and there's such a distance, there's such a gap that Rabbi Shulai Diskin would not be the Gadol that HaKadosh Baruch Hu puts for our generation. And maybe that Gadol is somebody who is a little bit more down in the trenches, which means that he understands this world and the people and the youth and the challenges that we have, which are unique, may be better than those earlier Gedolim. But the Torah learning is not as great. Now, one of the second point when it comes to what about the Daas Torah today? Maybe the Daas Torah is not actually a Daas Torah. I feel as confident as I did when I learned in Staten Island when the Moshe Feinstein was just a subway ride away. The second shot is the second word comes actually from Rav Moshe. There's a very famous story with Rav Moshe. And the story with Rav Moshe involves an aguna. It's a very famous story. It was the end of the war, and a lady came into Rav Moshe Feinstein, and the lady said that she was crying. What was she crying about? She said after the war, she thought her husband had passed away. They didn't have clear proof that he did, so they ended up going to a certain gadol. And that gadol, I don't remember which gadol it was, but that gadol said that she can remarry. So she remarried, and she's married, she's happy, and then one day she gets a knock on the door. Who is at the door? Her first husband. He did not pass away. And now she is crying. I don't know if the kids were mamzerim, but she was definitely an Eishes Ish. And she's married to this person and that. It was a balagan, it was a tragedy. And she's crying in front of Rav Moshe. And she says, what should I do? And Rav Moshe looks at her, and you know what Rav Moshe says? I didn't understand the story. Can you say it again? Say it again? Yeah, say it again. She says, okay, I was in the war and someone said he was seen in a gas chamber and they said, won't go in. And we went to this gadol and this gadol said, we can remarry. So I remarried and now my husband showed up. What should I do? She's crying. Rav Moshe says, I'm not getting it. Can you say it again? And at this point, the Talmidim of Rav Moshe were standing around and they're like, what are you torturing this girl, this lady? And she says it a third time, and then as she's saying it a third time, she gets up to the part of the story. She says, I went to that gadol. No, I didn't. I just assumed that my husband was nifter. I thought it was the right thing. And Rav Moshe says, listen, you're an Eishes Ish. What you did was wrong. And all the Talmidim were there and they were in his spell. Rav Moshe, how did you know? How did you know that she didn't go to the gadol? He says, because I know that gadol had taken upon themselves the oil of the tzibur. And HaKadosh Baruch Hu would never allow a person who takes the oil of the tzibur to give up sak that would end up in an Eishes Ish. He would never do that. Because when you take the oil of the tzibur on your shoulders, when you say, you know what, the buck stops with me. I may not be the smartest, I may not be the greatest, but Klal Yisrael's turning to me. I have to give an answer. And sometimes I'm the only one who could give the answer. When a person is makabel the oil of the tzibur, HaKadosh Baruch Hu is makbid that this person should be saved and he should give a good psak. And if he doesn't, it's not our fault. The parallel dovers, it's not Klal Yisrael's fault. More than that, when a person goes up to Shamayim, a person will be allowed to say, if they say, well, the halacha was like this, the person can say, I went to my Daas Torah, I went to my Rabbi, and they are potter. Loi b'shamayim. We listen to our Gedolim. Es Hashem Elokecha tira, l'Rabbi Talmid Chacham. So, even if today's Gedolim, Lama Zagin, are not on the level of a Divrei Yoel, they're not on the level of a Kloisenberger Rebbe. Who's on the level of a Kloisenberger Rebbe? My goodness. Also, Kol HaTorah Kula. Who's on that level? But the Gedolim today have taken upon themselves the oil of the Tzibur. And when they've taken the oil of the Tzibur, we can falazach on that as a Das Torah. That's the second point. Now we're going to make a different point. There was a little bit of a scandal. Little bit of one a few months ago. And it was unfair. And I think once we're speaking about Das Torah and how to follow it, we have to clarify it and stick up for Das Torah. Someone in Eretz Yisrael had done a radio interview about Shidduchim. So very famous, it went around, a radio interview about Shidduchim. And they interviewed a person who was a Welt Shadchanis. I know who the lady is. She's made many, many Shidduchim. And this lady spoke to this interviewer, and the lady began to say, I don't know what's going on with Das Torah today. They're advising the boys, I guess this is in Eretz Yisrael, to not marry unless the girl not just has money, but unless they commit to an apartment. Now, Baruch Hashem, we don't have that in America, but in Eretz Yisrael, it is almost like a chayt v'layavar. You get married, you need to buy the kid an apartment. Now, an apartment in Eretz Yisrael, even an inexpensive apartment, even in one of these new moshavim, you're talking about $120,000, $130,000, and maybe much more than that. And if a person's living in Eretz Yisrael, and even if they're a person who is sitting and learning in Kollel, and they've got many children, and they've got to buy apartments for every one of their children, I mean, that's Reichman territory. Which Kollel man could buy 12 apartments? The numbers don't add up. They're not even numbers. They're like monopoly money. So this lady was ranting that the Rosh Yeshivas are advising the boys, you want to sit and learn? Take a girl the father's going to buy you an apartment. And that's what the boys are doing. And then she said even more so, that not only that, she was at a chasana recently, and the father of the kala had a heart attack in the middle of the chasana. The stress, assuming that that's what it was about, the stress of committing to buying an apartment. And I didn't like it because, number one, it was really putting down the Rosh Yeshiva. What?
So they really say that first of all. I never heard it in my life.
You never heard that they said this? Okay. So she said she's heard it from Rosh Yeshiva. That's what she said. But it's that part doesn't bother me. Baruch Hashem, I have an uncle who's a mashgiach, and I learned a lot about making a Rebbe from him. His name is Reb Shalom Eisenman. He lives in Eretz Yisrael. And he once explained to me, we're going through the sugya in Erevin about Rabbi and, a person Rabbi, or Paisa, if you paskin something in front of your Rav, what is Megal Panim? There are all sorts of things that you could do that you could be Chayv Kares. And he would explain to me exactly how to approach a Das Torah. And one of the things he explained was that a Das Torah answers lefi what was asked. And we know this from all sorts of stories. Yibishal Salanter, the person was asked, can I use milk for the Arba Koises? So he saw that she doesn't have money, she probably doesn't have meat, so he bought her meat. Right? The Gedolim listened to the way the question was asked. It could well be that a Bachar who goes to a Rosh Yeshiva and says to the Rosh Yeshiva, I want to sit and learn. What eitzah can you give me? I don't have parnasa, but I want to be able to sit and learn. So the Rosh Yeshiva would say, well, if you want to sit and learn, find somebody who will support you, or support you by an apartment. But that same Rosh Yeshiva, if the father of the girl would come over and say, should I buy this guy an apartment? He would say, no, are you crazy? He'd say, you don't have money for an apartment. In other words, he's answering the boiler-fee his question, and he would answer the father and the kalafi their question. For the boy, the correct answer is, you should try to get parnasa if you want to learn. And for the girl, or the girl's father, the correct answer is, it's lunacy to overcommit. You'll stress yourself out, you'll be out of learning yourself. So, a gadol asks, lefi the way the question was asked. And I want to say that, the question is, what to'elis is there saying this on Torah anytime? But I think there's to'elis. One of the reasons I think that our dar has lost a certain amount of confidence in what we call Daas Torah is because the way questions are asked of the Gedolim very often are agenda driven. There's an agenda when someone goes to a Gadol, and you give the Gadol information that you want to give him, and you twist it in the way you want to twist it, and then you get the answer that you want, and then you print it and you make a macha, you make a big taram. And Baruch Hashem, having been around Gedolim, I've seen it, I've heard it with my own eyes and my own ears. I've heard the way questions are asked. If you ask it a certain way, person's meishiv koina, they answer the way the question was asked. And therefore we've lost a certain amount of confidence because someone just told me, I heard this story recently about Rav Steinman, that someone had come to him, that there was a concert in Eretz Yisrael, and this concert was one of the American singers, a nice American, Ben Torah or Yeshiva. Now he's a singer, I'm not judging. And he was going to go to Eretz Yisrael, he was going to have a concert. Now, whether you should have concerts in Eretz Yisrael, they do. Lamaisa, they do. They've had it for many years since I was a bacher. But these few chevra had an issue with this one guy. And if I told you the name of the person, you're like, really? They have an issue with it? But these two guys, they have an issue. So they went to Rav Steinman and they said, we've got to answer him. We've got to make sure he doesn't make the concert in Eretz Yisrael. And Rav Steinman says, why? Why? Because he'll make a concert and people are going to come, yeah? And then they're going to look at him, and and the ladies are going to look at him, and they're going to want to leave their husbands because of the. And Rav Steinman begins to smile like, really? Really? They're going to leave their. And Rav Steinman's he's not gullible. So and they're going to leave their husbands, and Rav Steinman looks at them and says, and what's going to be with his parnasa? What's going to be with this yid? What do you want? You want me to write a macha, so take away his parnasa? I'm not going to do it. But of course, he saw through these kanoim to the point. You can have a kanoi about anything, and you can go to a gadol, especially a gadol who's busy, and you can have 5, 6, 7, 8 people standing around him, and everyone's throwing questions out there, and you're one of those questions. I've been part of that group. Throw a question. The question has no context. It's not explained. You hear something, and then you get it in writing. I have a farish asked. So, it's an issue. It's an issue because we lose confidence when we hear things said, b'shem this gadol or that gadol. I'm sure we've felt that before. But for ourselves, when we want to get a Daas Torah psak, what we need to do is before we come with the question, to try to clear ourselves of negiyas. That's how we get a Daas Torah answer. To clear our minds. Of course we may want the psak to be like this or like that, but ultimately we want HaKadosh Baruch Hu, we want to know what HaKadosh Baruch Hu wants. And because a gadol answers the way the gadol was asked, if you come with negiyas, I remember I had a certain question. I went to Rabbi Yitzchak Kaduri at that time. I was near. I'm not a Sephardi, but I was. He's a Mekupel, and it was a sort of a Mekupel kind of a question. And there were 6-7 people around him, and I blurted out the question, and I said, "Would this be a good age?" He goes, "Yeah." And then I came away. Yeah, I got a shock from Rabbi Yitzchak Kaduri. Was that Daas Torah? In my heart of hearts, did he really hear the question? No, of course not. And later on, I went to Reb Shach about that question, and he said, "No, of course not." He didn't hear he said, "This is what you should do." And I had Reb Shach's ear, and he listened to me. The power of a gadol is that the gedolim, the real Daas Torah, they're very busy. The klal wants them, but they're able to focus. When the time comes, they could blot everything out. This is a tremendous story. I think the story should be spread. I was shopping in Monsey, and there was this young boy in front of me, maybe 17, 18 years old, and he was a kid at risk. Okay? And I was shopping, and I was on the phone, and I mentioned Rav Shmuel Kamenetsky on my phone call. I mentioned him. And when I finished with the phone call, the young boy turns around, and the young boy says, "Oh, I know Rav Shmuel." Like, really? Rav Shmuel, you know Rav Shmuel Kamenetsky, an 18-year-old kid? Yeah, a little street. I don't know what he's into. He goes, "Yeah, I know Rav Shmuel. He calls me every week." I said, "Rav Shmuel Kamenetsky calls you?" He goes, "Yeah, I once met him, and he talked to me to give me chizuk, and he told me he's going to call me every Friday." So Rav Shmuel Kamenetsky calls me every Friday to wish me a good Shabbos. What? This young kid from months, he's getting a call from Rav Shmuel to wish him good Shabbos? We don't understand what it takes to be this kind of a Daas Torah that takes the oil of the tzibur on your shoulders. There's so much compassion that's needed. They say that a person came to the Chafetz Chaim, and he had a question. Somebody was very ill. He was very ill, and said, "Chafetz Chaim, please daven for me." And the Chafetz Chaim said, "I'll daven, but there's a yid down the street. Get a bracha from him. He's the one you got to get a bracha from." And he went and got the bracha from the yid, and the person who was ill got better. A while later, someone else got sick once again, and he goes to the Chafetz Chaim, and he said, "Should I go to that person?" He says, yeah, you should. He says, "But I don't know if I can help you. I don't have koyach to make a tainus for a month like I did last time." Chafetz Chaim fasted for a month. Maybe a Monday, Thursday, I don't know what that meant. But he fasted for a month. He didn't tell this kid, he said, "Go get a bracha from him." Not saying the Chafetz Chaim is davening for a month so that this yid should get better. He says, I don't have the energy to fast again for a month. I can't do that. Who knew the Chafetz Chaim was doing that? You all know the famous story of the Chafetz Chaim, the person who was smoking on Shabbos, and he brought in front of the Chafetz Chaim Bacher from the Radin Yeshiva. He stands in front of the Chafetz Chaim. The Chafetz Chaim's got the whole world on his shoulders. The Chafetz Chaim looks at the boy, picks up the hand, and he begins to say, "Shabbos, Shabbos, Shabbos, Shabbos." And he begins to cry, "Shabbos." And the tears went on to this boy's hand. And this boy was discovered many years later when someone was saying over that story, and he said years later he still feels the burn of the Chafetz Chaim's tear on his hand. That's what a Daas Torah is. Okay, let's bring this down praktish, and then I'll end with a story. Practically speaking, many of those who are in Daas Torah, who have Daas Torah, are inaccessible. They're hard to reach. So we know that Aseh L'cha Rav means that if somebody is bigger than you and they're a Ben Torah, you could falazach on them. My students often ask me, is it better to go to the top, the greatest of the great? Or is it better to make a Rav, a Rebbe, who is accessible to you, that gets to know you? And of course we know that having a Rav who's accessible, who you can get to know, who knows where you're coming from. As a matter of fact, the advice that I give my children that I got from my Zayda is when you move into a city, the first thing you do is you go over to the Rav, you and you're married, go over with your wife and say, I just want to introduce myself. And you sit down for a few minutes and tell the Rav who you are. You didn't come with a question, you didn't come with an eitzah, you just want the Rav to know you. So that when they give a psak, it's not a generic psak, but it's a psak that's catered to you in your matzav. That's the beauty of a Daas Torah. And secondly, when you make that Daas Torah, find somebody who, like I said, is still linked in learning. Someone who's still learning, so their minds are still calibrated. And I'll end with this story. My Rebbe in Eretz Yisrael, his name was Rabbi Heshi Weissman. Rabbi Heshi Weissman's Rebbe was Reb Nachum Partzovitz. Reb Nachum's Rebbe was Reb Chaim Shmulevitz. You go up, Reb Baruch Berry, go up, Briskarav, all the way up. We're part of a Messiah that could trace itself back to Moshe Rabbeinu. And many documented papers that exist out there, where if you get up to a certain Rav, you could definitely trace yourself back up to Moshe Rabbeinu, and of course Moshe Kibbutz Torah Sinai, and so on and so forth, from the Tanoim to the Amoraim to the Goyim Rishonim Achronim, and then it was you, whoever your Rebbe was, whoever their Rebbe was. Rabbi Heshi Weissman was the mashkiach he was the Rosh Koil in a Koil in Eretz Yisrael called Meshech Chachma. Very strong Koil, very right-wing, strong Haredish Koil. And I learned there for a number of years. My uncle was the mashkiach of that Koil. And he learned by Reb Nachum, and he used to give a shir on the daf. It was beautiful. One day, a younger man comes in and says, I need to go back to America. Now, Rabbi Heshi Weissman was not a fan of people going back to America. He said, but I need to. My mother-in-law wants us to come back to a visit, and we have a question, should we go the longer period of time? Or there's a different time period we can go, which is somewhat shorter. And I guess it was a little more complicated than just longer or shorter. There were other variables. Which one should I go, the longer or the shorter? And Reb Heshi heard it, and Reb Heshi said, I think my Rabbeim would have said, you should go to the shorter period.